All right, so in the wake of the relentless stream of mass shootings that we have here on a regular basis in the United States, Congress is finally putting out some idea of what legislation they are willing to get done is going to look like. Of course, this is being done on bipartisan lines, which is obviously due to Democrats' inability or unwillingness to get rid of the filibuster to actually fight for the will of the American people. And so because it is being done along bipartisan lines, it is, of course, as Common Dreams is putting up here, pathetically weak, which shouldn't be surprising. We've seen this every single time that Republicans get their hands on a piece of decent legislation. It's going to be watered down, it is going to be undercut, and at the end of the day, it's not going to have the real substantive change that this country actually needs. So, a little bit of details here to start us off from Common Dreams. They say a group of 20 U.S. senators announced a deal on Sunday on an outline of a bill designed to give the appearance that they are taking meaningful action. And again, this is the outline of a bill. So even with this, milquetoast centrism that we're getting in this bill, even that is not a guarantee that this is what's going to end up being passed. But they say gun safety advocates were quick to point out that the deal mostly ignored guns. Kind of a big thing there when you're talking about guns in the United States being pretty much the sole major outlier as a variable that separates us from other OECD comparable nations around the world that don't have mass shootings. I mean, if you're going to do something to address the issue of mass shootings, you would have to address that variable being guns, but this is obviously very light on that. And they say they're rather focused on those areas that the NRA and their Republican supporters prefer the debate to be, along mental health and of hardening of schools. So again, when it comes to things like mental health, hardening of schools, these are just pure deflections for Republicans to avoid talking about guns, right? At the end of the day, Republicans very obviously do not support universal mental health care or health care in general. They are the biggest proponents of the continued privatization of our healthcare industry here in the United States, and they have repeatedly rejected any efforts to actually expand mental health care or to guarantee it to people who desperately need it in some of the most underserved communities across this country. But of course, this is what this bill is going to be focusing on, and even with that focus, it goes not even remotely close to far enough. But here was the quote from one of the senators who's championing this. He says, "Today we are announcing a common sense bipartisan proposal to protect America's children, keep our schools safe, and reduce the threat of violence across the country. Families are scared, and it is our duty to come together and get something done that will restore their sense of safety and security in their communities," the group said in a statement on Sunday. "We look forward to earning broad bipartisan support and passing our common sense proposal." So we're going to get back to what this doesn't have in it, but first let's just go over some of the basic details in terms of what is in this legislation. So here from NBC News, and again, this is largely preliminary. This isn't necessarily what the final bill is going to be entailing, but they say, unlike the series of gun bills that were authored by Democrats that passed the House last week, the Senate deal has a better chance of becoming law because it has support from key Republicans who wield effective veto power over gun legislation in the Senate because of the 60-vote filibuster rule. This rule, obviously, is the complete antithesis to what a democracy is supposed to be. And obviously, the Senate, in and of itself, is already inherently undemocratic. You have states like California that have 45 million people that get the same exact 2 senators that a state like Wyoming that has approximately 7 people in it gets. So, at the end of the day, the Senate is already inherently undemocratic. Then you slap on top of that the requirement for 60 votes within the Senate, not just a pure majority, 50 votes plus 1, Kamala Harris being that plus 1 in this instance. Having this 60 vote threshold is just absolutely undemocratic and absolutely ridiculous, and is really one of the major reasons why we're not able to get anything done. But reminder, again, Democrats could get rid of the filibuster if they wanted to. If they wanted to take on that fight within their own party to get rid of this, they would be able to get a hell of a lot more done. But unfortunately, they believe more in our precious institutions, as if the filibuster is one, more so than they care about actually addressing these issues at a substantive level. And again, not only do we have the filibuster rule, but we don't even still have the talking filibuster, which is what it used to be. And so you would think at a bare minimum, you would require these Republicans who are trying to filibuster this legislation to get up there and speak relentlessly to the American people and show their asses to the American people in describing how little they actually give a shit about this issue. But they continue saying the joint statement backing the deal was signed by 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats. Will be interesting to see if these actually hold. But they say A centerpiece of the Senate deal is to provide substantial resources for states to implement red flag laws, which allow individuals like the police or family members to petition courts to keep firearms away from people who are deemed a risk to themselves or others. Now, this isn't a mandate on red flag laws, which I think could be something that could be beneficial, at least partly, in starting to address this. I don't like the idea of police having the ability to, designate somebody as a red flag potential just based on whatever whims that they want. Obviously, police being an inherently right-wing and oftentimes racist institution, I could see that having potentially bad outcomes, but having the ability to have family members who really know their other members of their family very well and who could identify, this is somebody who doesn't need to have a gun in their possession, they're a threat to themselves or others, that I think would be a great thing. But as I point out here, this is not a mandate. This is basically just trying to mildly incentivize states to implement these red flag laws. And they say currently 19 states and the District of Columbia have red flag laws of some variations on the books, and the new provisions are aimed at increasing the number and improving their implementation. And they say the agreement also establishes a more rigorous process for background checks on people between 18 and 21 years old, with an enhanced review that includes contacting state and local law enforcement for criminal records that could be disqualifying, and to appropriate state organizations for mental health information that could affect the decision. So again, we're not raising the age for somebody to go out and get an AR-15. We're just mildly increasing potentially the parameters that law enforcement would have at their disposal, or that this criminal record system would have at their disposal to potentially prevent someone from getting a firearm. But they continue saying it slaps new penalties on straw purchasing of firearms to improve prosecution of traffickers, and it authorizes new money for mental health services and school safety provisions. Will be interesting to see exactly how this is implemented, because if we're spending money on shit like what Ted Cruz wants to do, and creating schools into mini police states, then that's not going to be effective. And if it comes to the mental health services, that would be absolutely fantastic. But I obviously have my doubts that they're going to be implementing this in a sound and coherent and substantive way. Forgive me for being somewhat of a doubter on that front, but we'll have to see exactly how it's implemented. But finally, they say the agreement would also include a provision to address the so-called boyfriend loophole on domestic violence, sources familiar with the negotiations said. So this is all the preliminary shit. Obviously, I think that it's wholly inadequate. I do support some of the things that are in there, but as pointed out here by Common Dreams, there's a lot of pretty important things that are not in this piece of legislation, namely most things that relate to actual guns. So as I point out here, they say the common sense deal doesn't include any of the key provisions on gun safety, or that gun safety advocates say are necessary. And keep in mind, most of these, if not all of these, are overwhelmingly supported by the American people. So if we did have an actual democracy and a democratic say in what type of legislation gets passed, these types of things would be in a bill like this. But they say there's no ban on semi-automatic weapons, no ban on high-capacity magazines, no 21 minimum age to buy an AR-15 style assault rifle, no universal background checks, which has literally been supported by 80 to 90% of the American people for years and years and years now. Still no universal background checks, no safe storage rules at home, no requiring background checks on internet sales and at gun shows, no banning family members from purchasing weapons for their kids. So obviously, with a handful of mildly good things that are in this legislation, what's much more glaring here is what's not in this legislation. And these are really the things that I think would have much more of a substantial impact on actually reducing the likelihood of mass shootings or gun violence in general. So of course, this is what bipartisanship gets you. And I think I had a couple good takes here lined up from Nina Turner here, and also Brandon Friedman on what this legislation actually means in the current context. So Nina Turner said the gun reform framework is inadequate. Agreed. If they don't have the courage to put universal background checks in the bill, something that 88% of Americans support, it's a charade, not legislation. There's no courage. And they say the framework aims to give Congress the ability to say, see, we did something. It will not work to prevent mass shootings. And I think she's absolutely correct there. This seems like it's really more of a perfect opportunity for Republicans to get up there, pretend like they've done something meaningful, deflect away from the conversation, and really take a lot of energy out of this movement to get something real done in a moment like this. But also, as pointed out here in a similar vein to that commentary, Brandon Freeman said, this is potentially worse worse than nothing. It will have no measurable impact on gun violence. It will provide Republicans with cover to say that they did take action, and after it passes, the sense of urgency to pass truly effective legislation will decline by an order of magnitude. And listen, I think that he's absolutely right there. I mean, listen, I'm not trying to be too pessimistic or pretend as if, any bipartisan action is always going to be inherently terrible, but I think this is a great example of how that can be the reality when it comes to things like gun control or many other, things that we are trying to accomplish as leftists in this country. So, obviously completely inadequate, doesn't include a lot of things that would really start to address the ridiculous ability for Americans to have guns in this country in basically a completely unchecked and unregulated manner. I'm not even against guns completely. I don't believe in gun confiscation programs or anything crazy like that, but I do believe that we should make it much more substantially difficult or inconvenient for people to be able to get guns like the AR-15, for example. And you can go about doing that without infringing on anybody's constitutional rights, even though conservatives have a completely perverted view of what the Second Amendment actually says in it. I do believe that people should be able to have individual firearms for personal protection or for hunting or whatever it may be, but having these regulations in place wouldn't infringe on that ability whatsoever. If you have to wait, a 30-day waiting period to get a gun, if you have to, pass some mental health evaluation or pass some safety standards and other regulations, just like you do when you want to go out and drive a car or when you want to become a pilot, I think that those types of regulations would be actually effective in addressing gun violence. But unfortunately, this is the product of bipartisanship in this country. When you have an entirely corrupted government with especially Republicans, but also many Democrats who are controlled by not just the NRA, but also the gun lobby in general and all of these small arms manufacturing corporations. When you have that type of situation, this is the extent to which they are going to be willing to go to confront the problem that is at hand right now. And it seems like, unfortunately, this is going to be completely inadequate, while simultaneously giving cover to a lot of Republicans and Democrats alike to pretend as if they use this moment to do anything substantial, when they definitely did not use the full power that they have at their disposal to change the current situation and the status quo that is literally killing American men, women, and children alike.